All right, here we are for the RDMA update portion for what's in flight for the giant stuff. Matt Benjamin, I believe, is going to give us an update on what's going on there. Matt, are you able to?
Yes, I think.
Oh, excellent. There you are. Yep. So, well, you can take it away then.
Okay, these are going to be short and sweet, but I'll just go over the things that are happening. The pull up to Firefly is the big thing. It's in progress still, but there are a couple of points that we've dealt with in the last couple of weeks. One, we've adapted to changes in Excelio's messaging interface, which was a surprising thing. That they want to put on the one branch that we use. And this is back just quickly. The Excelio message, essentially Excelio's data type for a message, their message abstraction represents data as arrays of an extended IOVEC type. And formerly, there was a fixed array of 16 of these in each Excelio message structure. In order to improve the kernel side memory budget, I believe, they've reduced that to 4, but also allowed you to allocate your own dynamic array that can be larger. And that affects us a bit. It's easy to track the change because in a simple sense, because we had always built, all along we supported chaining messages together. That's a feature that's already supported in the Excelio API, but the significance is that previously a fairly almost complete set of operations would almost always be set in a single message, whereas now with chaining of 4, it's more likely that we'll see chaining of IOs in flight. And the ordering and other things should already be handled. So I did explore. So it's a potential tuning problem. I have a branch that also explores whether we want to create our own set of IO buffers or buffer IOVECs basically, and then install them in preference, so I can profile it side by side. What I think I found so far is that there may be some issues with doing that. So for the moment, I've just adapted the code to work the new way, and haven't had a chance to reprofile and with workloads that are likely to provoke chaining. So that's an open item. But the second high level point, there had not been. I hadn't done fine-grained profiling and testing, or profile-based testing, since pulling up to Firefly, and I had the impression that there was some performance regression there, and I was able to spend some time last week and do that. There indeed was some performance regression, but have been able to address it. We now have at least met the same, the small message low latency performance that we were getting in Emperor, and I think we're actually exceeding it. One of the last changes I was able to explore was doing some reorganization of the buffer and buffer list, which I believe have improved optimization with at O2, and I think contributed to performance. So it'd be interesting if someone had time to look at that. Ongoing stuff. We have an agreement that the sort of immediate target is a single messenger that's either compile time or runtime selected rather than multiple messengers. I believe I'll be able to do that this week. Also, hopefully be able to implement Markdown and Markdown all, which is the one interface change that we block on. And the sort of forward part of the next generation of this that I think users that Sage and I and others have talked about in our last meeting. We have talked about adding channel support to XO Messenger and Messenger in general. Since the current setup, the current design of Messenger implies a messenger for any logical flow of messages, and where you need to avoid head of line blocking and so forth. Um, um, we reviewed that with the Excelio folks to confirm whether we already had in the Excelio API what we would need to create channels within a pair of endpoints, and essentially almost do. It's the case that that a given endpoint that an endpoint can get independent message ordering just by creating additional connections on to the other endpoint, which if the other endpoint has multiple portals, which is an abstraction of an Excelio server that deals with that. But it appears that there's a little bit more policy that will be needed in order to get to allow the sender and receiver to agree on a specific portal or a specific number of portals. There's also we've also been discussing with upstream or with Excelio team basically putting in an explicit flow control interface, and there's agreement from Al and those folks that we can do that, and we're going to I'm planning to send a write-up this week about some of what we think we need there and what it would look like.
So just to relate that back to Ceph, I think there's sort of two things that we would use that for. In Ceph, one is to separate the flows between different entities in order to prioritize them differently. So for example, on the OSD, we might want to send recovery traffic at a different priority than replication traffic potentially, and be able to control those, the sort of the QoS associated with those. And then on the other piece is that right now we have this heart beating function that the OSDs are doing, where they're pinging each other to make sure they're still alive, and we're using totally independent messenger instances that are opening independent TCP sockets and making sure that they're communicating, which is expensive and also sort of awkward to manage and whatever. So on the other hand, it's a larger change to be able, if we had this channel mechanism or whatever, then you could sort of have the heartbeats in a different high priority flow streaming across the connection. That might help, or might not.
Yeah.
So that would be
that's exactly what that's what
that was sort of that's the motivating use case. But we need to. It's not a slam dunk. I think we have to be a little bit careful with that because of the way that, especially with the simple messenger, at least the way that the throttling works, we need to make sure it's compatible, I guess, also. Anyway, yeah, I guess it'd all be different here in the XAO case, but yeah. So I can just jump in a little bit and let you know where we're at on the sort of the flip side. So I took the first few patches of the original XIO branch. We're doing a bunch of refactoring, making a bunch of refactoring changes in the messenger APIs and abstractions. So that got cleaned up a bit and tested and built up in the WIP messenger branch. So there's cleaning up the API and simplifying it, dropping a bunch of legacy calls that we don't use anymore or need anymore, and sort of trying to standardize on a few of the newer interfaces where we can. And so that's all generally ready to go in WIP messenger. It just needs testing. And then be merged. And then the XIO stuff can get rebased on top of that.
Okay.
I think the main piece in order to make it be sort of ready to go is to drop the duplication of the. We've talked about this offline, but we might as well iterate it here so everybody sort of knows where we're at. To drop the separate instantiation of the XAO messengers. So instead of having two parallel messengers, there's just a config flag that'll create a different kind instead of the simple messenger kind. So that there are fewer changes across the code, and it's hopefully just like one patch that basically says create the XAO kind instead of the simple kind. So fix messenger instantiation via single config option. And I think with that, I think that would get you to the point where the current branch is, where it'll just, you could start up a cluster that's pure XIO, and it would generally work.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So I should rebase on XIO, sorry, with Messenger. Sounds like.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. Yep. And it mostly only changes. I think there are like 2 or 3 patches in your series that it sort of subverts and whatever. And then I think a bunch of the other ones we can drop out. Once you add, on top of that, if you add the flag that will make the create messenger factory function or whatever.
Got it.
Just create the other kind.
Is that branch actually at a stable point yet?
I need to. I think it works in my sort of basic testing. I haven't run it through Tautology yet. So, but it's just blocked on all the other random stuff that I'm busy with. But if you do that rebase and it falls over, that would be helpful to know. And if it doesn't, then that'll also be helpful to know. But you can sort of prioritize that accordingly. Let's see. So I guess 0 rebase on with messenger. Fix the messenger instantiation via a single config option. And I think after that, it's mark down and mark down all are missing. And then it's the peer-to-peer. What is it? Lossless. The lossless peer policy mode or whatever. I think that's the thing I'm worried about. I'm not actually sure. It might just work mostly, but I think that's the part that we have to make sure behaves. Because in the simple messenger case, we bend over backwards to make that work properly with all the weird sequence numbers and retries, and it's all weird because you have multiple peers connecting to each other, and they need to settle on a single stream that's ordered and doesn't confuse anything when you're thinking about all the races that can happen there. But I imagine that's going to be sort of the last challenge. But at least with 0 to 3, you could use this just for the client-facing interfaces and not for the backend one. And you should have a fully working cluster as long as Markdown is behaving.
Okay. Yeah, my sense. Would you agree that it's likely to, without some of the sequence startup and so forth, that it's likely to work in simple cases, but it's just going to lack resilience?
Yes. It's going to fall over when you have a cluster of like 10 nodes instead of 2 nodes or whatever. Yeah. Yep. The issue is when you have a bunch of them, they're all talking to each other, and then they start, one of them flaps, goes down, or restarts or whatever, and then they come up and they try to connect to each other and they get confused.
Yeah, I think hopefully suitable for some benchmarking, if not.
Yep. What was that, Greg?
Oh, I was just saying it's reconnect. It's not really about size. It's about when OSDs restart and reconnect to a OSD that used to have a session to them or whatever.
Yep. Yeah. Well, if you have a big cluster, then there are more of them, and
it's more likely. But...
What's up?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Okay. But I think that's the general sequence. So looking forward a little bit, I started a branch with adder that changes the encoding for the address type in a way that will be backward compatible, but not forward compatible, I guess. However I usually miss using those terms. And so the idea there is that we would have a type field on the address that says this is an XIO endpoint and not a regular IP4 or IP6 endpoint. And I sort of at the same time was changing the encoding to be more efficient. Currently, we're just dumping a sock adder storage struct always, which is like 80 bytes, even if it happens to be an IPv4 address in there, which is one of the reasons why the OST map structures get really big on big clusters. Even IPv6 addresses are only 16 bytes, so we can cut that way down. But the other half of that is adding a new type called entity addervec. That is a priority list of addresses. So you could have a daemon that binds to multiple protocols and multiple endpoints. So for example, you could answer both IPv4 and IPv6, and the client would just pick one of them based on whatever its priority, whatever one matched its own address types. And so you could have a cluster that had both XIO or IPv4 or IPv6. But I think this is sort of lower priority. I think eventually we want to do all that, but for now we just want to get this working, and the requirement that it be purely XIO in order to sort of get this, get this working is just fine. Out of curiosity, I don't know if anybody, people in the RC channel, how many people would want or need multi-protocol access? I'm wondering. This has always annoyed me that if once you do IPv6, everything has to be IPv6. You can't sort of mix and match, or at least the clients have to support both. Does anybody have a sense of whether that's actually important, having sort of hybrid environments? No. We'll always need IPv4. Well, yeah, I mean, usually Ceph is deployed inside your data center, so it's not like you have to talk to, you care that, some random schmo's old Windows 95 machine doesn't support IPv6. But yeah, yep. Okay. All right, I think the other sort of feature piece of this that new style. The other piece of this is getting all of the users in Ceph to sort of migrate off of the old API for Messenger, that where you're passing an address with every call, with every send call, to the connection-based API. There's still a bunch of users in the code base that are using the old one and not the new one, and they need a sort of a moderate amount of attention to do that migration. And when we do that, we can sort of drop a bunch of annoying code in the Messenger and simplify people's lives. But again, it's low priority right now because we don't have an alternate implementation that has to carry that burden. But eventually we want to do that. Actually, Matt, do you have a sense of has that actually been a problem for you, supporting like the dual send message calls? One that takes a connection pointer and one that takes an address. Is that a headache or is it not a big deal?
I think it's not a big deal. I mean, the key was to get all the reply. The key is that when you have dual messenger, you must reply with the correct connection and messenger pair. And so the biggest, right? So there's a bunch of change that deals with that in the daemons that we that we support. I think it's all of them now. I mean, so when you reply, you need to not just go off. You either grab my messenger and send on it, and you need to not mix and match. So it is a headache. But it mostly works correctly if you match the replies. So I think we obviously want to transition to it as much as possible, but it shouldn't be inappropriate to use an address when it makes sense.
So in the WIP messenger branch, that's one of the things that I think I dropped. I think I cleaned up most of those cases. So there's now when you send a message, instead of doing messenger send message, you do con send message, and so you can just do my incoming message, get connection, send. And you can send it back on the same pipe without figuring out which. Yeah,
that's great because all the code is just boilerplate to connect them anyway.
Yeah. So I think most of the remaining users that still use the adder interface are in the monitor, which is doing a bunch of goofy stuff when it's talking to clients, and in the NDS actually. And then the OSD is talking to each other. That's the last one. But at least it's all funneled through one helper function. So there's some hope of cleaning that up, but I think for the purposes of XIO, we're in pretty good shape.
Okay, well, I'll have some pull requests probably this week, or at least things to review, and I'll pull up to with Messenger this week.
Cool. Okay. Sounds good, and it continues to be on my list to get with Messenger through the QA suite. Yep.
It sounds great. It sounds like it solves a lot of cleanup problems in a clever way.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Let's see. Do we have any other questions on the list?
There's more people talking about multi network communication systems.
Let's see. Yeah, so in front end, it would be a start if you can have back end and front end on different stacks, which you can. Oh, actually you can't, because it's a global option that says whether you bind to v6 or v4. That's interesting. Okay. It's worth noting.
So I've seen elsewhere that Lustre goes to a lot of trouble with a thing they call LNet that lets you communicate over different fabrics, but I don't know how widespread it is that people actually use that.
In the Lustre world, they use it everywhere.
I mean, yeah. So granted, they have a different target world than we do, but
its implementation is in kernel space for the most part. There was a user space implementation that only supported TCP, but their InfiniBand implementation is a kernel space thing, so not really an off-the-shelf job.
Oh, I was just thinking in terms of demand for those features, like the ability to have different network connections. But I don't know if it's only the HPC systems that use that, and even their other like sort of industry customers don't, or.
I think people have been hamstrung by inability to do it reliably, not by the lack of desire to do it.
Yeah, I'm not sure LNet is the right way to go.
So, I mean, so back to this multi-stack thing. Right now, there's an option MS bind IPv6. That's a bool that will globally tell the messenger whether to bind to a v6 address or a v4 address for incoming connections. The client obviously will use whatever protocol the server side is. But we also have like public cluster, or sorry, what is it? Cluster network equals and client network equals. I wonder if we should have like cluster protocol equals or client protocol that sort of mirror those two options, so that you could. Like, is that the way to? Would that be the way to do it? Because then you could say like client protocol equals XIO, for example, or even in order, and it would try to bind to an XIO for that, whereas the cluster protocol would be,
That sounds more production usable to me.
Yeah. Or, okay. And then the messenger create function would take a type string or something, where you'd pass in, TCP or XIO, and they would use that to decide which messenger to instantiate.
Yeah. The combination of conflicting config options is always a pain to handle, but it's probably worth it.
Yeah, I think these would override the bool.
Yeah, that's my expectation.
But is protocol the right word here? Transport.
Transport, yeah, or transport type.
Yeah.
Is a sort of cluster and client network a thing you can specify in any transport we're likely to have? Or would those combinations get very strange?
Well, in XIO, certainly it's easy because it's just an IP address, right? You would have to specify the IPs that match the interface that the XIO or the whatever that's RDMA connected.
Yeah.
I don't know what any other type of address looks like, honestly. Like in the normal InfiniBand RDMA world, do they also identify things by IP addresses, or is there some other weird address?
And that's how it's done in InfiniBand.
In InfiniBand, it's also IP, so he said?
Well, actually, I was just proxying what IP verbs would do, and yeah, with RDMA CM, that's the model.
Okay, so it's still IP, but sort of magically not.
Not IP, I think.
Yeah, he means that you use IP address to find your endpoint. Yeah, uses IP to find the endpoint, which and then sets the InfiniBand above that.
Got it.
Below it.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, maybe this we should put in here somewhere. 1.5 actually is to do the client cluster transport. It's actually not a single config option, but maybe that's the way to change the instantiation function. Is to just add these options and then change this messenger create function to create the right one based on that. Does that make sense, Matt?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
This is something that would appear on Web Messenger, right? Probably. Or
yeah, I would do it on top of that. Yeah,
I can prototype it, but yeah, just come with some. Your address thing sounds perfect, and then I think people since going back to DCE have wanted to have strong multi-protocol stacks for.
Yeah.
So I know we want it.
Yep, and I think this will be a quick win for IPv4, IPv6 too. So actually, this will be IPv4.
But it's absolutely on the critical path for that, doing that right also.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Cool. Okay. Okay. And then it's just the markdown stuff. All right.
Cool. Well, we got a couple of minutes left if people have questions remaining on the RDMA stuff. But it sounds like we had a pretty comprehensive overview here.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Okay.
All right. It doesn't look like there's any questions remaining, so I'm going to go ahead and end this one, and we can move on to the CMake discussion here in just a minute.